Hello everybody, welcome back to Papel Podcast. My name is Michael and today we are going to continue our Eastern Valley project with part 4. In the last episode, we began the texturing phase and got about halfway through. In today's episode, we'll wrap up the texturing phase by completing all remaining textures and prep our model for Showcase in Unity. Before we start, I'd like to quickly direct you guys to a poll I've set up where you can vote what should be modeled next after Eastern Valley. Simply click the link in the description below to vote, or comment below with any suggestions or ideas you have for a future episode. No idea is a bad idea. With that out of the way, let's finish Eastern Valley and go from art to model. Okay guys, here we are again, back at it and texturing. What you're watching right now is about 6 or 5 hours of footage sped up and compressed into 10 minutes, which is absolutely insane. I know usually I kind of have to speed this footage up, but this I had to speed up more than my editor could even handle. I had to actually render it sped up and then speed up that sped up footage because it was just so much footage, so much time to compress into that time slot. So texturing took a long time. What we completed in the last episode was basically a small portion of it. It was just basically the clock and the fairway. It was the ground assets and stuff like that. And the most time-consuming bit of this was just texturing the buildings and environment around it, because you will see it later on, but I actually ended up creating a few props for the surrounding area of the scene, so that's going to be really cool, and I hope you guys enjoy that. But yeah, as you can see here, it's just texturing as normal. I tried to do a different approach to texturing from the last time that we textured, actually. From the last episode where we textured the clock, I took a more realistic approach. I tried to do it sort of closer to what we did with Roy, where it's like the same style, the same visual look and colors, but it has more grittiness, it has more detail, smudges, dirt, and all that type of stuff. With this, I tried to scale that back just slightly, and I even redid some things like the roof texture, and you'll see that later on. But throughout this whole process, I constantly looked back at the textures that I actually use for Eastern Valley, and I tried to kind of keep them on hand and keep them as a handy reference, because I needed to keep it within that same cartoony style, but obviously have it as PBR textures to make it look realistic, detailed, and procedurally created. So that's kind of what I'm doing here, and yeah. So right here I'm doing the outer wall, and I think this took about maybe 3.5 hours to do from start to completion. I did take a different approach with the color palette. What you see in the concept art is the building itself is very white, and then the roof is kind of like this orange type of salmon color, almost red. And I tried to use a closer color palette found on to the one found in the game with the final textures of Eastern Valley. So it looks a bit more like the art style and texture style that they used in the game, but it still carries those features from the concept art, and it actually turned out really nice. I'm glad I did that. So here I'm just completing the bridge, and it's got some nice normal map detail, which looks very nice, very bumpy. And I'm just doing the connections to make it look a bit more better. And this is something I do with pretty much all the wooden pieces. I do this edging, and I just take it's kind of like a watercolor brush, and I drag it across the edge of everything, and then make the layer just slightly transparent, so then it's not too contrasty, but it has just a little bit of style there. And this is something that I'm doing here, which actually carried across the whole model. I'm really glad I did. It's not in the concept art, but basically I created this little logo, as you can see there. It's kind of like this, almost like the swirl in the G of Pangyas, and then it has like a little edge. And then on the sides of this, I have Pangyas like text, which is found, you know, everywhere in the game. I've kind of looked at some references, memorized the shapes, and it's actually quite easy to write out, so I use it a lot, and it looks really good. It kind of reinforces that this is like almost like a magic school, but it's also still like this old traditional styled environment, which is really nice. And right there I just decided to put a Papel face because I've been trying to find a place to put a Papel face for the longest time in many of these videos, but I finally found a good spot for it. So and again, I'm just putting this text all over this outer wall. It looks really good. I'm really a fan of that. I tried a few different things for this part. I was going to do like a circular bit around the clock, but it just didn't look right or really feel right, so I just ended up keeping the arrows on the sides. And then all I do here is kind of blend the grass better with the wall, because they do line up perfectly. So I added these little kind of grass, like kind of brush strokes that just kind of go across everything and make it appear as the grass is resting on the edge of the wall. So yeah, that's pretty much the wall nearly done. I'm just doing some final adjustments, and then we move on to this, which is you kind of skip forward a little bit. This is one of the props that I quickly made, which is one of the mountains that you see in the concept art. Now, the texture colors and the style is slightly different from the one in the texture art. As you see throughout this whole video, I do kind of make some differences. It's not strictly based off the concept art. I kind of took my own take on it as well, but obviously I referenced back to the concept art as much as I could, especially for shapes, more so than textures. But these are very similar to mountains that are found on like Eastern Valley, but also it reminds me a lot of Blue Lagoon. And yeah, I thought that was really cool. And now we're moving on to one of the final parts of this, which is texturing the building itself, which is like the big buildings at the back. And as I said earlier, my intention for this was kind of to make it look like a school, like some sort of magic school, or you know, some school that would be hosted at Eastern Valley. And I think that makes a lot of sense with the style that they chose and the style that they've replicated here. Before this door, I looked at the doors that are found on the Eastern Valley textures around the buildings, and they have a lot of detail, a lot more than I probably would have paid attention to if I didn't kind of study them for this project. So that was really interesting to see. But as you can see, I kind of used this similar markings from the outer wall before, and again the Pangyas textures everywhere. And I used this color palette of kind of green, like a bluish green type of color. Yeah, I just try to use that color kind of everywhere I can, to try to harmonize things and make sure that it all ties together and looks correct. But as you can see here, I just add in this little bricked pattern from the sides, and it looks really good. Actually, it kind of reminds me of things that are featured and seen in Sepia Wind and Wind Farm, which is really cool. I really like how that turned out. But then here I'm just adding just a small bit of detail to the side with these bricks again, the same types of bricks, but I tried to do a closer color to the one on the wall. And I did try a few things here with the side of the building with bricks there, but it just didn't really quite work out right, or didn't really feel right, so I ended up going against it and changing it up. And the same with this pattern that I'm painting on now with the bricks, which I actually used on the kind of entranceway to this little diorama. I ended up taking this back and changing that back to what it was before. You know, it's really interesting with all this texturing. You kind of, with anything in art, you do see all these changes and you have all these ideas, and then you put it into practice and you're like, that doesn't quite work the way I wanted it, or like, oh, it just doesn't look or feel right for whatever reason. So it is interesting. With this part here, this is a really interesting part that I actually kind of came up with in my head at the last minute. I added a little sort of green sign that points to the two entrances at the kind of, I guess, gate or doorway. And there's even 2 Papels on the sides, which are really cool. But those entrances are kind of, you know, I imagine the text would kind of say like, oh, this is the school, and like you can go this way for this classroom or this way for this classroom, stuff like that. So, but as we wrap up the windows here, we are pretty much complete. We have finished all the texturing for this Eastern Valley project. A few little pieces here and there didn't get shown on this because I did have to compress this to, you know, pretty much 10 minutes of footage. And obviously this series was originally only going to be 3 parts, but I ended up extending it to 5. This is part 4, and at this point we are complete. We are ready to put it all together, construct it as a scene, and put it and showcase it in Unity, which is the best part and definitely my favorite part. So next week, on the final episode, the final part of Eastern Valley, we will construct the scene, put it all together, and showcase it in a special directed video, and it's going to look amazing. I've seen the final product right now, and I can't wait for you guys to see this. It's really something special, and especially coming from the first thing that we ever did was Roy, it's really, really amazing and so much bigger than I ever thought it could be. So, as always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you on the greens. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that thumbs up button and subscribe for more content. And don't forget to support us on Patreon below. A big shout out to Sub Baby, which is this month's Patreon supporter. Thank you so much, and I appreciate your support. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the greens.